Good morning, everybody. Today we are discussing a poem written by Polonius Advice to his son, written by William Shakespeare. Polonius Advice to his son, written by William Shakespeare. So, William Shakespeare was born on 1564, was died at 1616. So, he was considered as a great poetic genius and playwright of the English literary world. He was born in Stratford upon Avon and attended the local grammar school. We do not know much about boyhood and youth. He was not well educated, left for London to seek his fortune. He worked in various firms and finally he joined the theatre as an actor. But by the age of 30 years, Shakespeare established himself as a poet, playwright, and a partner of Globe Theatre. Shakespeare is a master craftsman and written 37 plays, which include histories, tragedies, comedies, and tragic comedies. He has written 37 plays, 154 sonnets. He has created wonderful characters with vividness. Yes, its relevance today. His poetic skill is evident not only in his plays but also in his sonnets. Shakespeare lived during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I and James I of England. Shakespeare remains England's greatest dramatist, but a dramatist with an international reputation. Dramatist with international reputations for his plays have been translated into a quite number of other languages, and Shakespeare plays have found audiences in theaters of the world. Shakespeare is remarkable for the way in which he presents his plot, and though parts of it might have been borrowed from other sources. For his creation of life like characters and for beauty of the poetry. But he was notoriously careless about the future of his play once it was acted upon the Elizabethan stage. Consequently, all kinds of changes were made in the manuscript of his plays by those connected with staging and publishing. So we have a whole lot of literature on the question of what Shakespeare actually wrote. He wrote history plays, comedies, tragic comedies. For four tragedies are important: Othello, the other being Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear. So many actors have won fame by acting in Shakespeare's plays. So Shakespeare was married 8 years older than him, Anna Hathaway. He had three children, Judith, Susanna, and Hamlet. He has written 37 plays. Without Shakespeare, we won't pass English in our graduation level. He is one of the greatest dramatists in the world in English language. In English language. So the prescribed poem, the Polonius advice to his son, written by William Shakespeare. Now I am going to read the poem Polonius advice to his son. Polonius, yet here, Laertes aboard for shame. The wind sits in the shoulder of your sail, and you are stayed for there my blessing with thee, and these few precepts in thy memory. Look thou character, give thy thoughts no tongue. Look thou character, give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought is act. Be thou familiar, but no by no means vulgar. Those friends thou hast, and their adoption tried. Grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel, but do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new hatched, unfledged comrade. Beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in. Beware that the opposite may beware of thee. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve the judgment. Costly the habit as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy, rich, not gaudy. For the apparel oft proclaims the man, and they in prance of the best rank and station are of a most select and generous choice in that. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend. For loan oft loses both itself and friend. And borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. This above all to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessing season this in thee. Most humbly do I take my leave, my Lord. So this is well-known passage. This extract is a well-known passage from Shakespeare tragic play Hamlet. This extraction is taken from this poem. This part is taken from the Shakespeare greatest tragedy play Hamlet in Act First, Scene Third. This extract taken from the Shakespeare's greatest tragic play Hamlet, Act First and Scene Third. This is taken. Here, Polonius is a character in Shakespeare's Hamlet. He is King Claudius' chief counselor. Polonius is the chief counselor of King Claudius and the father of Ophelia and Laertes. He was the father of Laerte. Polonius' son Laertes wanted to and went to study for higher studies at Sorbonne University in Paris. Once, Polonius' son Larte wanted to go to study in Sorbonne University in Paris. He had come to his native place, Elsinore, Denmark, to attend the coronation of King Claudius after the death of Elder Hamlet. This extract is full of worldly advice is given by Polonius to his son Laertes. At the time of his departure to Paris by ship, Polonius spoke this word. Spoke this word. So I already told you, Polonius advised his son is an extract from William Shakespeare's tragedy Hamlet in Act First, Scene Third. Polonius is Lord Chamberlain to the King of Denmark. He advises his son Laertes, who is leaving for France for higher studies. Polonius gives his son many do's and don'ts, which he thinks will save his son from bad company and help him to grow into a good, wise, and successful man. His advice reveals the anxiety of a father for the welfare of his son in an alien land, Paris. Polonius tells his son Larte that the most important thing for a man is his character. A person of righteous is highly respected in society. Polonius advises his son not to disclose or express his thoughts to others and not to put into action his reckless thoughts into action. He must keep some private thoughts to himself. He must not be rash in his action. He wants his son to be friendly with others. Polonius wanted his son Larte to be friendly with others, but he should not become too familiar, which may take him cheap and vulgar and thus lose his dignity. He advises his son to be careful in the choice of his friends. Having chosen his friends, he must test them sincerely and, if found to be true, test them, test them sincerely and found to be true. The friendship must be made stronger and intimate. The friendship must be made stronger and intimate. He advises his son not to wasteful in his habits. He should not entertain every new friends and friends who are immature mind. Should not entertain every new friends and friends who are immature mind. He tells his son not to enter into quarrel unnecessarily. Polonius advises his son not to enter into quarrel unnecessarily, but once in it, he must fight bravely and it must teach the opponents to be cautious of him. Larte is advised to listen to everybody but not to voice his opinion unless it is called for. But very important thing is Polonius gave advice to his son Larte to listen to everybody but not to voice his opinion unless it is called. He should hear each man's opinions. He should hear each man's opinions, but the final decision should be his. Lartes should wear costly clothes to suit his status because the apparel often proclaims the man. Lartes should wear costly clothes to suit his status because the apparel often proclaims the man. But at the same time, it should not be too expensive. It should, his clothes should not be too expensive, fancy, and gaudy. One's dress is often an indication of one's character. One's dress is often an indication of one's character. In France, people from royal families were to be very careful in the manner of their dresses. Lattes advises his son not to borrow or lend money. Very important thing is not to borrow or lend money. Not to borrow the money from others, not to lend money to others. So by lending, you may end up conscience. If one is true to oneself or sincere, then automatically he can never to be false to others. Very important thing is Larte advises Polonius advises his son Larte to be true to himself and act accordingly. And Larte's advice son not to borrow or lend money. By lending, he may end up losing his money as well as his friendship. Suppose you borrow the money from others or lend the money to others, so it may end up losing his money and also a friendship. Borrowing would make him spendthrift. Borrowing make him expensive. Finally, Lartes advises his son, sorry, Polonius advises his son to be true to himself and act accordingly to his conscience. If one is true to oneself or sincere, then automatically he can never to be false to others. False to others. So he'll give every man the ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. So these are important lines in the poem. These lines taken from the poem Polonius' Advice to His Son, written by William Shakespeare. Polonius, Lord Chamberlain to the King of Denmark, tells these words. Polonius tells these words to his son Larte, who is leaving for France for higher studies. Polonius tells his son that the most important thing for a man is his character. A person of righteous is highly respected in society. Therefore, must keep some private thoughts to himself. He must not be rash in his action. He wants his son, Larte, to be friendly with others, but he should not become too familiar, which may make him cheap and vulgar and thus lose his dignity. He advises his son to be careful in the choice of his friends. Polonius advises his son Larte to be careful in the choice of his friends. Having chosen his friends, he must test their sincerity, and if found to be true, The friendship must be made stronger and intimate. Suppose it tests their sincerity and if found to be true, the friendship must be made stronger and intimate. He advises his son not to wasteful in his habits. He should not entertain every new friends and friends who are immature mind and friends who are immature mind. So he tells his son not to enter into quarrel unnecessarily with others, but once in it must fight bravely and it must teach the opponents to be cautious of him. Lattes is advised to listen to everybody but not to voice his opinion unless it is called for. He should hear each man's opinions, but the final decision should be his. Final decision should be his. So Polonius advises Latte, and according to Polonius, every man should have a very good conduct or character. According to him, if a man's character is lost, then everything is lost in his life. So he tells his son that he should have a virtuous character which is praiseworthy in society. Larte is advised to be dignified and think twice before talks. Larte advised his son to be dignified and think twice before he talks or expresses his thoughts in public. He is guided to keep his personal thoughts to himself. He is also asked to be calm and have patience in the case of wild and unproportionate thought. Wild and unproportionate thought. In other words, he should be very careful and conscious in thinking, talking, and acting. Otherwise, you careful and conscious in thinking, talking, and acting. Polonius advises his son to be dignified and good with his friends, but not to be mean or stubborn. He is cautioned to select his friends after some deliberations. A trustworthy and faithful friend should be shielded with love and affection, and he should not let him go. Polonius also advised Larte not to be very lavish in his habits and should not spend money unnecessarily on new friends. On the whole, Polonius advised his son to attract friends only with his virtuous character, not with money. Polonius advised his son to attract friends only with his virtuous character, not with money. Polonius guides his son not to enter into a quarrel for silly reasons, not to enter into a quarrel for silly reasons. If he once involves himself in the quarrel, he should define it himself totally. He's defined himself totally. Lotte should warn the opponent to be cautious of him. Lotte should listen to the elders and take suggestion from all, but should take his own decision. Hereby, he says that decision should not make according to the person, according to the person, but persona. Hereby, he says, Polonius says that the decision should not make according to the person, but persona. Lattes is asked to develop good habits based on his financial status. Since he is the son of a rich person, he should dress up very richly. He should dress up very richly and with dignity, as our presentation in public often portrays our personality. He should dress like a son of a rich person, but not in an odd manner, as France is a land of culture and history where Lotte lives, where Lotte goes to higher study in Paris, France. France is a rich in culture and history. Polonius' most famous lines, neither a borrower nor a lender, for loan of losers both itself and friend. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan of losers both itself and friend. Is well known in English language. Friends becomes foes or enemies in the matter of monetary means. Money related issues often make us to lose our friends, but Polonius at the end of his speech advises Laertes, this above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. But Polonius at the end of the speech, this above all thine own self be true. Honesty is the best policy. One should keep honesty and should be true to his own self. Character is very important in one's life. Character is very important in everyone's life. Finally, Polonius bids farewell to his son and blesses him. Laertes takes leave along with his father's advice. So critical comments about the poem is Polonius' advice is a well-known passage of practical wisdom. It mirrors his experience of life as well as typical attitude of the aristocratic society. So Shakespeare lived in Elizabethan period while advising his stubborn, young and energetic son. Polonius has probably thought that the fashionable people of Paris are very advanced and dotty in their appearance and manners. That is why he wishes to implement some rules of good conduct on his son. He also gives his son a few moral tips on how to lead a peaceful and colorful life in another reason. Another reason. Take note of the tone of Polonius while advising his son in a form of authority. It indicates that Polonius believes that he is very firm in his decision and always right. This shows the character sketch of a speaker of the poem. Speaker of the poem. So it is very important to know that from which play this passage has been extracted. It's a goodbye scene between brother and sister to begin with, and subsequently between father and son. Before leaving for Paris, Lattes advises Ophelia as to how she should conduct herself in her relationship with Prince Hamlet. Ophelia, in turn, tells him ironically to be careful and to remember his own advice, and he should not become a prey to the extravagant or luxurious life of fashionable society. Polonius put an end to their conversation by interrupting in the middle and bids farewell to his son with morals precepts expanded in the lesson. Here we can notice that all the members of the family are advising each other, but no one is adopting it into their own life. They are very easily imposing some code and conduct on others. Unfortunately, their negligence and irresponsibility overtakes their practical and worldly wisdom. Worldly wisdom. So it is about the poem Polonius' advice to his son, written by William Shakespeare. Next, we are discussing P.B. Shelley's poem Ozymandias. Ozymandias. So written by P.B. Shelley. Now we are discussing P.B. Shelley. The prescribed poem is Ozymandias to you for your mm, second BA language. Ozymandias written by P.B. Shelley. Ozymandias written by P.B. Shelley. Percy Bysshe Shelley. So Percy Bysshe Shelley was born in 1792 into a wealthy Sussex family, which eventually attained a minor noble rank. The poet's grandfather, a wealthy businessman, received a baronetcy in 1806. Timothy Shelley, the poet's father, was a member of parliament and a country gentleman. The young Percy Bysshe Shelley entered Eton, a prestigious school for boys, at the age of 12. While he was there, he discovered the works of philosopher named William Godwin, which he consumed passionately and in which he became a fervent believer. The young man wholeheartedly embraced the ideals of liberty and equality exposed by the French Revolution, and devoted his considerable passion and persuasive power to convincing others of the righteousness of his beliefs. Entering Oxford in 1810, Shelley was expelled the following spring for his part in authoring a pamphlet entitled The Necessity of Atheism. So, atheism being an outrageous idea in religiously conservative 19th century England. At the age of 19, Percy Bysshe Shelley eloped with Harriet Westbrook, the 16-year-old daughter of a tavern keeper, whom he married despite his inherent dislike for the tavern. Not long after he made the personal acquaintance of William Godwin in London and promptly fell in love with Godwin's daughter Mary Wollstonecraft, whom he was eventually able to marry and who is now remembered primarily as the author of Frankenstein in 1816. Shelley traveled to Switzerland to meet Lord Byron, the most famous, celebrated, and controversial poet of era. The two men become close friends. Byron and Shelley become close friends. After a time, they formed a critique of 18 English expatriates in Pisa, traveling throughout Italy. During this time, Shelley wrote most of his finest lyric poetry, including the immortal Ode to the West Wind, Ozymandias, to a Skylark, etc. Shelley drowned while sailing in a storm of the Italian coast. He was not yet 30 years old. Shelley belongs to the youngest generation of English romantic poets. English romantic poets. The generation that came to prominence while William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge were setting into middle age, where the older generation was marked by simple ideals, and a reverence for nature. The poets of the younger generation came to known for their sensuous aestheticism. There and the infamous Lord Byron came to be known for their sensuous aestheticism, their explorations of intense passions, their political radicalism, and their tragically short lives. Shelley died when he was 29, Byron when he was 36, and Keats when he was only 26 years old. So these authors are died at a very young age, at the age of 29, 20, 36, and 26. To an extent, the intensity of feeling emphasized by romanticism meant that the movement was always associated with youth, and because Byron, Keats, and Shelley died at very young age, so they have attained iconic status as the representative tragic romantic artists. Shelley's life and his poetry certainly support such an understanding, but it is important not to indulge in stereotypes to the extent that they obscure poets' individual character. Shelley's joy is magnanimity, His faith in humanity and his optimism are unique among the romantics. His expressions of those feelings makes him one of the early 19th century most significant writers in English. So it is about the brief introduction about the author P.B. Shelley. Now we are going to read. I am going to read his poem Ozymandias. Ozymandias, written by P.B. Shelley. I met a traveler from antique land who said two vast and trunkless lakes of stone stand in the desert. Half sunk, a shattered visage lies whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that it is culture will those passions read, which had survived stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that marked them and the art that fed. And on the pedestal, these words appear, very important lines. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, a mighty and despite. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, a mighty and despite. Nothing beside remains, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away. Lone and level sands stretch far away. So, Ozymandias is a poem of 14 lines like sonnet. It is an iambic parameter sonnet. So the poem begins with conversation between speaker and a traveler. The poem begins with the conversation between speaker and a traveler. Here we have a speaker learning from traveler about a giant ruined statue that lay broken and eroded in the desert. The title of the poem, Ozymandias, informs the reader that the subject is 13th century, 13th century BC. Egyptian king Ramses II, whom the Greeks called Ozymandias. It is about the poem of Egyptian king Ramses II, who ruled Egypt in 13th century BC. Generally, the people called him as Egyptian king Ramses II. The people called him as, in Greek, Ozymandias. The traveler describes the great work of this culture was able to capture the king's passion and give meaningful expressions to the stone, an otherwise lifeless thing. Stone is a lifeless thing. The marking hand in line 8. So the hand marked them and the art that fed. So that of this sculpture who had the artistic ability to imitate the passions of the king. The sculpture systematically and sympathetically recapture the king's passions in the stone. The sculpture systematically and sympathetically recaptured the king's passions in the stone. So the last few lines mark the inscription hammered into the pedestal of the status said statue. The original inscription read, I am Ozymandias. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my words, a mighty and despite. So if anyone wishes to know that what I am and where I lie, if anyone wishes to know what I am and where I lie, let him surpass me in some of my exploits. The idea was that he was very powerful for even the common king to relate to him. Even a mighty king should aspire at matching his power. That principle may well remain valid, but it is undercut by the plain fact that even an empire is a human creation that will one day pass us away. The statue and the surrounding desert continuing a metaphor constitute a metaphor for invented power in the face of natural power. By Shelley's time, nothing remains but a sheltered bust, eroded visage and trunkless legs. Visage and trunkless legs around. Visage is the face. Visage means face, trunkless and without body. Face and without body, surrounded with nothing but level sands. Level sands that stretched far away. Shelley thus points out human mortality and the fact of artificial things. Artificial things. There is a message in this poem that the hegemony in France and England has ended. Everything about the king's exploitation has also ebbed, and all that remains of the dominating civilization are shattered into pieces like stones in the desert. This point has been stressed in the poem Ozymandias. The perspective on the statue is coming from an unknown traveler who is telling the speaker about the scene. This helps create a sense of the mystery of history and legend. We are listening to the story from a poet who has heard it from a traveler who might or might not have actually seen the statue. The statue itself an expression of the sculpture who might or might not have truly captured the passions of the king. But our best access to the king himself is not the statue, but the king's own words. King's own words is, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my words, a mighty and despise." Finally, we cannot miss general comment on human vanity in the poem. It is not just the mighty who desire to withstand time. It is common for people to seek immortality and to resist death and decay. Furthermore, the sculpture himself gets attention and praise that used to be deserved by the king for all that Ozymandias achieved as now decayed means destroyed. Destruction. Decayed means now destruction into almost nothing. While the sculpture has lasted long enough to make it into poetry, in a way, the artist records of the king's passion carved into the stone. Carved into the stone. Shelley closes the poetry as a medium in order to create something more powerful and lasting than what politics could achieve, all the while understanding that words too will eventually vanish away. Unlike many of his poems, Ozymandias does not end to a note of hope but ends abruptly as a traveler has nothing more to say and the persona draws no conclusion of his work. Also, critical comment about the poem is the first person poetic persona status that he met a traveler who had been an antique land. The traveler told him that he had seen a vast but ruined statue where only the legs remained standing. The face was set in the sand, frowning and sneering. The sculpture interpreted his subject well. There also was a pedestal at the statue where the traveler read that the statue was of Ozymandias, king of kings. Ozymandias, my king of kings, look on my words, yet you mighty and despise. Although in the pedestal, they have written a mighty onlookers that they should look out at the king's works and thus respect at his greatness the entire statue. Entire statue, and it is surroundings and sand and nothing but sand, nothing. So in the desert there is only a sand, there is nothing. So are just covered with flat sand, but all that is left is the wrecked statue. We know that from the title, the speaker is talking about Egypt. The traveler told the speaker a story about an old fragmented statue in the middle of the desert. The statue is broken apart, but you can still make out of the face of a person. The sculpture did a good job at expressing the ruler personality. The ruler was wicked and very ambitious man. So Ozymandias, already told you, is a Egyptian king. His name was Ramses II. The Greek people called him as a Ozymandias. Ozymandias. And they did a good job of expressing ruler personality. The ruler was a wicked and very ambitious man, and this could be noticed by the lines written on the pedestal of the statue that says, I am Ozymandias, King of Kings. King of Kings, look on my words, a mighty and despite. So that is, if anyone wishes to know what I am and where I lie. If anyone wishes to know what I am and where I lie, and where I lie, let him surpasses me in some of my exploits. In some of my exploits. So in this way, he is an Egyptian king ancient Europe. The Greek people called him as Ozymandias. It is about the uh, summary of the summary and critical analysis of the poem Ozymandias, written by Percy Bysshe Shelley, P.B. Shelley. In the next class, tomorrow we are discussing some other chapter. Thank you. See you.